The word clone is derived from the Greek word klon, which means twig. The Greeks knew that if you broke a twig and planted it, a copy of that tree would result. George W. Bush said in his speech, "Human cloning has moved from science fiction into science." The best example of this is Dolly the lamb. She was the first successful clone in 1996. She was produced in Edinburgh, Scotland. She was a genetic copy of the donor cells. This made Dolly the first successful clone. Dolly was produced by nuclear transfer. She is a threat to our identity, our morals, and our ethical values here in the United States. This is why cloning should be banned in all forms in the U.S. I will argue the 3 reasons why cloning have a complete ban on it, in my opinion. Even though research and cloning for therapeutic use seems to be promising, it is not worth the risk. Even with the strictest rules and regulations, people will take advantage of it. Issue I will talk about is how human cloning is a threat to our identity and our individuality. And the last thing I will argue is human cloning is not ethical, it's not moral in our culture here in the U.S. There have been strict laws against human cloning since its existence. The National Health Institute prohibits funding research that involves destruction of embryos in any way. Considering cloning is transfusion of embryos, this falls under that category. Research still can be done in a private lab with private funds, even with these strict regulations. Many states in the U.S. have banned it. Cloning is bad for your health. There's a high chance of rejection of the tissue by the clone cell. Dolly, when her telomeres were examined, they were shorter than normal, which indicates that she had a stressful life or a quick aging process. This tells us clones might not be able to live long and survive like the human race. A quote that George W. Bush said in his speech that has to do with ethics is very applicable to what we are talking about. George said, "Research cloning would contradict the most fundamental principles of medical ethics, that no human life should be exploited or extinguished for the benefit of another." Cloning is a threat to our identity and to our individuality. When Dolly the lamb was created in 1996, the most prevalent public reaction was one of fear and panic. People did not know how to react to the fact that you could clone an animal from one parent cell. Dolly lived a short life. She only lived for 6 years, which would indicate that clones and Dolly are not genetically ideal. Clones are a threat to our uniqueness in today's society, diversity, and appreciate it. Cloning would eliminate all diversity. George W. Bush quotes, "Our children are gifts to be loved and protected, not products to be designed and manufactured." Leading into our next topic, George W. Bush says, "Allowing cloning would be taking a significant step toward a society in which human beings are grown for spare body parts and children are engineered to custom specifications, and that's not acceptable. The last topic I'm going to talk about is therapeutic cloning. The risks of therapeutic cloning outweigh the benefits. It is not safe. Some companies fund therapeutic cloning research for the wrong reason. They just are in it for the money. Therapeutic cloning creates a whole new legal black market for human body parts. Cloning can also make transgenic animals. George W. Bush brings up a very relevant topic in his speech in the following quote. He says, "Yet even if research cloning were medically effective, every person who wanted to benefit would need an embryonic clone of his or her own to provide the designer tissues. This would create a massive national market for eggs and egg donors and exploitation of women's bodies that we cannot and must not allow." Cloning also has a low success rate. The risks outweigh the benefits. One firm with the name ACT made 17 attempts to clone an embryo and only produced 3 viable embryos. Although therapeutic cloning isn't currently viewed as successful, it may be successful in the future. There are many implications of this through studies done by the private firm ACT, and George W. Bush mentioned it in his speech. He said, "The National Institute for Health is also funding a broad range of animal and human adult stem cell research. Adult stem cells, which do not require the destruction of human embryos and which yield tissues, which can be transplanted without rejection, are more versatile than originally thought." I explained the science of cloning and how it is a threat to our identity. Cloning should be outlawed to protect the human race. I have explored the 3 dominant arguments against human cloning. Even though research and cloning for therapeutic use seems to be promising, it is not worth it even with the strictest regulations. Human cloning is a threat to our identity and individuality. And human cloning is not ethical or moral in our culture. I will end with a quote from Nathan Myhrvold. "Suppose that every prospective parent in the world stopped having children naturally and instead produced clones of themselves. What would the world be like in another 20 or 30 years? The answer is much like today. Cloning would only copy the genetic aspects of people who are already here."